Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's Australian Catholic Super Retirement Planning webinar, the latest in our series. Today, we'll be hearing from both myself and one of our local financial planners, Vivek, and I'll be referring to Vivek throughout the presentation, just on some of the more technical issues and to draw upon his experience throughout the presentation as he's seeing members individually all the time. Just a reminder that today the recording is, or the presentation I should say, is being recorded and is being live streamed on Facebook. For those that wish to view any of this content again, parts of or in its entirety, it will be available on YouTube by the end of the week. So bear with us on that. There are other presentations already there which have me presenting the same content if you wish to view one I've done earlier. I would also like to do an acknowledgement of country. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I work and live, recognising their continuing connection to land, water and community. I pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. A reminder too today that what both myself and Vivek will be talking about will be general advice. So we would encourage people to seek additional individual advice if they wish to act on anything. So we always encourage people to read the PDS. We also encourage people to seek further information and fact sheets and the like from the portal and download the phone app. But I will speak more about that as we move through the presentation. Just to start with, in terms of retirement goals, these are traditionally the retirement goals that we see people having, although it is fair to say over the last sort of 24 months or so, retirement goals have changed a little bit in the sense that expenditure patterns have changed a little bit. So as you can see there, the priorities, for example, of travel and particularly cruising, which we've highlighted there, have absolutely lost their shine. And we're not seeing those retirement goals anywhere near as prevalent as we once did. Often people, when they retired, it was one of the first things they wished to do, whereas at the moment it's fair to say it's probably one of the last things they would wish to do. So gardening's probably far more appealing, and camping locally and spending time with the family. But today we will be talking about how to fund all these activities when you're no longer working and earning exertion income. Fundamentally, the question is, how much super do you have and how much will you need? And this is predominantly what people ask. So why do we talk about super being so important, and why do we ask people to stay on top of it? Well, quite simply, it's vitally important that you understand what you have, that you understand where it's invested, that you understand the insurances you've got, and you want to also make sure that your employer is paying into your super at the required amount. I will speak about what that minimum percentage is, but they're the reasons why it is very important that you are at least familiar with your superannuation. It also is the gateway, if you like, to getting further help and advice as needed. In terms of how much are you going to need to live on in retirement, the Australian Superannuation Fund Association, which is abbreviated as ASFA, has put together a paper and given an estimate on some numbers that people will need and will spend in their retirement. And as you can see there, they've divided it into two categories. So for those seeking a modest retirement, singles need just under 29,000 and couples need just over 41,000. For what ASFA would regard as a comfortable retirement, you can see there a single needs over 45,000 and a couple needs just short of 64,000. And this does assume you are debt free. So it's worth noting here that the full age pension would fall short of both of those modest and comfortable requirements, which begs the question, what is a modest lifestyle and what is a comfortable one? Well, ASPA do go some way to defining this. And as you can see in the table before you, they go some way to trying to define it in terms of, you know, an older car that's less reliable is modest, whereas in a comfortable retirement, it's a more modern car. It's better quality clothes, it's better quality wine, it's more leisure. By its very nature, however, this is a subjective report, and it has to be, because I often say when you're trying to come up with expenditure patterns for everyone from, you know, Hobart to Cooktown to Broome and Perth and everything in between, it is an nigh on impossible task. However, I would encourage people to have a look at the report. You can see the reference down the bottom there where to get it. And it will show you in detail the itemised areas where people currently do spend in retirement and the amounts that they spend. Many people underestimate, frankly, what they'll spend in retirement. So, as I say, a very, very good guide, but by its very nature, a subjective one, and your numbers will no doubt be slightly different. If we have a look at when we do plan for retirement, we're not just talking about superannuation. A lot of people just equate superannuation with retirement. However, when you're retired, naturally enough, you'll be drawing upon all your resources, not just your superannuation ones. So one of the advantages in seeking assistance via financial planning, be it with us or be it anywhere, is that they will be able to consider these other assets that you've got to ensure that you don't run out of money, you know, late in life or deep into your retirement. That's essentially what financial planning and what planning is designed to do. It's designed to ensure you've got adequate monies throughout your retirement, your entire retirement. And then if you do wish to ensure there's money left for the estate, well, that too can be planned for. One of the major benefits of superannuation is tax. And to summarise it quickly, you can see there, the earnings in superannuation are taxed up to 15%. And I say up to because many of the investments within superannuation have what's called imputation credits. So that actually means the net rate of tax being paid by the fund is often not 15%. It's often a little bit lower than that. However, it is a maximum of 15%. And likewise, when you're in, or if you choose to take what we call a transition to retirement pension, it's similar. It's the same rate of tax. It's essentially 15% less the imputation credits. It's when you fully retire, and for most people, fully retire and aged over 60, and you move to this account-based pension or allocated pension, it's the same thing, just by a different name, you'll be on a zero tax rate in terms of the investment earnings. So that's why the superannuation structure and tax category has such appeal. It's essentially an incredibly concessional tax path to take to maximise your wealth and to provide adequate resources when you need them most, and that is in retirement. I'm going to refer to Vivek on this slide, one of our financial planners, just to speak to these three age brackets. And the reason we've divided these age brackets the way we have is the conditions, the release conditions for each are slightly different, and the tax implications for each can be somewhat different. So Vivek, if I can just hand over to you to speak to this slide, please.
Yeah, thank you, Wayne, and good morning to all of you. This slide is actually related to the previous one in very similar ways. So conditions of release are the circumstances when you're allowed to take your money out of super. One of the quid pro quos of giving you a concessional tax in super was the fact that you couldn't access it until you were ready to use it to fund your retirement. So the preservation age was one of the conditions of release. Until then, your money is locked in or preserved. And this has gradually been increasing until it'll reach age 60. At the moment, It's at this transitional point where people age 58, or in some cases 59, are eligible to access their money, either if they retire or even if they're working in a limited way. There are tax consequences of doing this because everything coming out of super is only tax-free after age 60. So that's the first part. The middle part is when you've met other conditions of release that apply to you after age 60, where in particular, if you retire after age 60, or you have a change of employment circumstance, as it's called, after age 60, you can get access to your money in an unrestricted way. And the final bit is a third condition of release, which applies to you whether you're working or not. At age 65, you can access your money. So you could be working full-time or part-time or whatever, but you have access to your money. So it has implications on tax that you might pay if you access your super, but it also means at these milestones, you have options available to you that it might be worth considering in terms of structuring how you hold your super money, whether you're working or not.
Thank you, Vivek. And I should have mentioned at the top, apologies, that if anyone has questions as we move through the presentation, please feel free to lodge them in the Q&A section or the chat section. And I'll make sure either Vivek or myself get back to you at some point just to speak through, whatever it may be if we haven't covered it off today. In terms of the superannuation guarantee rate, as you can see there, we're currently at 10.5. Sorry, my apologies, we're currently at 10. I get ahead of myself. We'll be moving to 10.5, I should say, this year, as you can see from the 1st of July. But you can also see a continuing increase in the rate up to mid-2025. So that's already legislated. So we can look forward to increasingly higher inputs from our employer. And again, this circles back to the reason why we always say you should have an understanding of your superannuation and what's going into it, because it's vitally important that you receive these amounts and you know where they're being invested. One of the common strategies people use, particularly as they get towards age 60 and towards that pivotal moment where they're considering retirement, is salary sacrifice. The real big advantage of salary sacrifice is tax. So if we take, for example, the average wage earner, which would fit into the $45,000 to $120,000 bracket, as you can see there on the left, paying 32.5% tax. That's when, through their exertion income, money is going from payroll to their bank account. They're paying effectively 32.5% tax. However, if they were to send some of that money to superannuation, it would be taxed far lower. It would be taxed, as we saw, at 15%. And that's the contributions rate into superannuation. So there's a net saving there of 17%. And to get a sense of its value, I'm going to ask Vivek to talk through the next slide, where you can see an example of someone who's salary sacrificing to super and taking a little bit less, but he'll hopefully talk through the tax concessions and why it's appealing. So Vivek, can I ask you to explain this one to you?
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. So the example is of someone getting $100,000 per annum, and the two columns in white show the outcomes as they are now with no salary sacrifice, and if the person was going to salary sacrifice 5% of their salary. So you can see that the 5% amounts to $192 per fortnight, and the taxable income immediately reduces by that amount. And that, of course, is what the tax is calculated on. So once the tax is calculated, it comes up with a difference of $127 in that fortnight. So you gave up $192 of your after-tax income or pre-tax income and put it into super, and you've ended up with $127 in your super. But had you taken that money into your salary, you would have paid more tax and you would have ended up with less money into your super. So the savings is basically calculated out there at the bottom is $66 per fortnight. and that's $1,700 odd a year, which if you were to pursue with that strategy for 10 years is $17,000 extra in your super. And having gone into the super bucket, as Wayne mentioned, the tax rate there is lower as well compared to what you would pay on money outside of super. So it grows faster as well. And this is not even taking into account the growth that will happen over the 10 years. So you're well ahead on 2 counts, and that's the reason why salary sacrifice is such an effective way to save.
Thank you, Vivek. And when we do salary sacrifice, the category of the contribution is what we call concessional. And the reason it's called concessional is because you're not paying your marginal tax rate. So you're paying, as I mentioned before, 15% contributions tax, and hence that's concessional because it's not the higher level, which is likely to be your marginal rate. So here we're talking about, when we talk about the concessional contribution limit, we're talking about in the current year, a maximum amount of $27,500, and that is made up of employer contributions, the super guarantee contributions we looked at, salary sacrifice contributions, any additional contributions the employer may submit, and even personal contributions which you subsequently then claim a tax deduction on. So it's all of those combined. There is also at the moment, there's also an allowance for what we call unused amounts of your concessional cap from previous years. So this was introduced in 2018. So for example, and the major condition here is if your balance is under 500,000. So for example, if my balance was under 500,000 and I used of last year's cap, which was 25,000, I used $20,000 of it. I could carry over that remaining 5,000 to this financial year, which would mean instead of having a cap of 27,500 this year, I would actually have a cap of 32,500. I know that can sound complicated. For those that do require more information around it, please let us know, or please just have a look at the website and you'll be able to get further information on it. But it is a very good use of an allowance and a provision for those with balances under 500,000 who wish to salary sacrifice or contribute more than they first thought they could. If we speak about non-concessional contributions, and again, I'll refer to why it's called non-concessional. It's called non-concessional because you've paid your full marginal tax on the money. So this is typically money that's already in your bank account. You've paid full tax on it. So naturally enough, the allowances for how much of this type of money you can use and put into super is much higher. So as you can see there, if you're under 67, it's 110,000 per annum, and you can use what we call this 3-year allowance, whereby you could put in 330,000 in a single year, but it would prohibit you from putting money in the following financial year and the one after that. You've effectively used your 3-year cap in a single year, if you like. For those aged, as you can see there, between 67 and 74, it's $110,000 a year, and that is the maximum. And for those over 75, you can't make any further non-concessional contributions. The thinking being from the government, once you reach that age, it's well and truly time to be drawing back on your superannuation and start to enjoy the money. If we look at other major ways you can contribute, and I'll refer to Vivek on this slide as well, because the downsizer contributions are a particularly interesting one and a fairly recent one and a very significant one for those going into retirement. So Vivek, if I can ask you to speak to this slide, that'd be terrific.
Sure. So as Wayne said, the downsizer came in relatively recently, perhaps a couple of years ago, and it was meant to encourage people to downsize and gave them an incentive to be able to put money into super. So even if you've used up all your other quotas in the past and you're past the age at which you're allowed to contribute, subject to some rules and eligibility conditions, if you downsized your home, or if you sold your home really, that you've owned for at least 10 years, you then get an eligibility for both of you, if you were both owners of that home, to be able to tip money into super, regardless of other constraints that might have existed prior to this. So it's a good way to be able to bring money into super when earlier you couldn't. And there are some technical things that need to be taken, looked at and made sure around that. So please seek advice when you do that, because you need to tick a few boxes to go down that path. Spouse contributions have been there for a while and just allows you in some situations to be able to build up a lower income spouse's benefits, sometimes also used as a way to access money sooner if there is an older spouse who might reach preservation age where they can access their money sooner. So it can be used for a couple of different strategies.
Thanks, Advic. And also too, when we're consolidating monies, we always do encourage people to consolidate superannuation where they're able, but we would flag the warning, just be wary of your insurances, just to ensure that you don't unknowingly cancel an insurance arrangement that may be difficult to get back. In terms of when you can access your superannuation, we're in this transition period at the moment, as you can see there. On the left-hand side, for those born early in the early 60s to the mid-60s, you can have a preservation age that's actually under 60. I mean, soon this will wash out of the system as the years roll by. But at the moment, we generally talk 60, but you can, as Vivek mentioned, get your money under 60. There can be tax implications though, so it's certainly worth getting advice. But by and large, for most people, it'll be age 60, and it'll be, as it says there, when you've ceased an employment arrangement to be able to access your super. And when we talk about accessing your super, another question that comes up a lot is, do I need to make a decision on whether I take a lump sum or an income stream? And the answer to that is no. You can do both, and many people do. So what would typically happen is people would want, for example, a monthly income from their superannuation, but they would also perhaps want to update the car, or perhaps do a kitchen renovation, or some other lump sum expenditure which they've been delaying until retirement. So that is certainly possible. So when you set up an allocated pension, you can take lump sums from it, even though it is paying you a monthly income, irrespective. So they are incredibly flexible, tax-free arrangements. So for those that are seeking more information on the types of vehicles that you'll be using typically in retirement, by all means, let us know. But yeah, as I say, very, very flexible arrangements. And this move from superannuation to a pension account, essentially we're moving from what we call the accumulation phase to the drawdown phase. So as mentioned earlier, in the accumulation phase, you've got money coming in, and money coming in from personal contributions, be it concessional, be it non-concessional, employer contributions, lump sums, government co-contributions, other rollovers when you consolidate your super, perhaps even the downsizer contribution that Vivek mentioned before. When you move to the account-based pension, you're then effectively locking in that capital and drawing down on it. So here, the only way the pension account grows is through the earnings on the investments. You can't make additional contributions, if you like, to a pension account. You're now in that drawdown phase. For those that need more flexibility than that, you can have a superannuation account and a pension account at the same time if you require it. And as I say, if you do have questions around that, by all means, let us know. We can help you with that. One of the other arrangements that can cause confusion for people is when we talk about this transition to retirement arrangement, where we're not completely in super, but we're not completely in the pension phase either. we're in between. So we're sort of enjoying the benefits of both, if you like. So I'll ask Vivek just to talk through what we would call a TTR pension and the benefits of it. Thanks, Vivek.
Okay, great. Thanks, Wayne. So as Wayne mentioned, the TTR pension is a sort of halfway house between accumulation and the retirement account-based pensions. It's a way to provide access to your money while you're still working. So it is a separate tax structure. It used to have tax benefits in the past as well, but now it's similar to accumulation, but subject to a limit of a maximum of 10% per annum, you can access money from it. Now, that access to that money can result in a couple of strategies that you could use to improve your financial outcomes. You could use the extra money to pay down debt, for example, but you could also undertake a strategy that tops up your income to a level where you can salary sacrifice more and save tax. So you're recycling highly tax paid income and replacing it with low tax income, and the savings are accumulating for you for retirement. So it can get complicated, but there are some strategies that can hinge off a transition to retirement, which is available to you even while you're working and even before you're 65. Works best after you're 60 because the payments come out tax-free.
And now we move to the allocated pension, which is where most people end up after they've retired beyond age 60. So now you're in a situation where there's no tax on the investment earnings, there's no tax on lump sums you withdraw, there's actually no maximum that you need to take out. There is only a minimum you need to take out. So there's no upper limit, if you like. And for the current financial year, the minimum pension you're required to take has actually been further reduced by 50%. Now, the reason for that is the government has figured that current spending patterns are a long way from being normal. So we won't require people using an allocated pension to draw down minimums of 4% when they're under 65 and 5% and beyond when they're above it, because it's difficult to spend money in the normal way at the moment. So the minimum that you need to draw is actually 2% if you're under 65 and 2.5% if you're over 65, although as you get over 65, the minimum does increase. So it's worth bearing that in mind, but it will revert after this financial year. It will revert to the normal minimums that you are required to draw down. And as I say, if you're under 65, think 4%. If you're over 65, think 5%. And as you get older, above 65, it increases slightly as you get older. So just bear that in mind. In terms of product choices, Australian Catholic Super is similar to a lot of providers in the sense that if you wish to control and choose where your money's invested, you absolutely can. And if you wish to choose where your money's being drawn from, you absolutely can. So if we look at the variety of options you've got, if you're choosing the RetireChoice investment options, you can see there you've got the diversified options on the left, and you've got the single asset classes on the right. Now you can choose as few of these or as many of these as you like. And for those that do wish to completely control where their money is invested, we can certainly accommodate that. Equally, for those that don't wish to choose where their money is invested, there is what we call RetireSmart. And this is a system whereby essentially the Australian Catholic Super is trying to maximise the growth while minimising the volatility. So it will choose a selection of growth assets that aim to do those two things. And it uses what we call this two-bucket investment model approach. So you've got a growth bucket and a cash bucket. So to to illustrate diagrammatically, the growth assets generate the cash distributions, and they flow into what we call the cash bucket, which funds the pension payments. And if there's excessive money in that cash bucket, that flows back into the growth assets to hopefully subsequently generate even further distributions, which would go back to cash. So it's a way to relieve people of the anxiety that can come with choosing investment classes and what portfolios to put money. When we talk about investing and investing for retirement, we're typically talking about periods of up to 25 and 30 years. So if you think about life expectancy at the moment being above 85, most retirements starting in the early 60s, but many people are getting into the 90s these days. So we're talking about retirement periods of, as I say, 25 and 30 years long. Longevity risk becomes a real concern for many, many people. So the question around when can you retire becomes really, really important. And do I have enough? And this is where we would say advice can really assist. COVID is impacting expenditure patterns, as I mentioned. It's also probably delaying some people's retirement. But on the other hand, with depending on what industry you're in, it's probably bringing it forward, quite frankly. So it's altering the normal retirement patterns, if you like, that we're used to seeing. But essentially what we're trying to guard against and what people fear is running out of money and being completely age pension dependent late in life. So when people talk about longevity risk, that's essentially what we're referring to. And we've got an example here, and I'll just walk through some of the key elements of the situation, and then I'll hand it to Vivek just to talk through the way a typical scenario would play out. So we've got a couple here, both 65 years of age, both having 300,000 in super. They are debt-free and own their home. They require combined income of 63,000. So they're in that comfortable zone that we looked at with the ASPA guide. They don't have non-super investments. We're assuming inflation at 2.5%, and we're assuming a rise in living standards to meet that at 2.5%, a rate of return at 5%, and everything we're going to show is in present value today. So don't feel as if that's 20 years forth, therefore I've got to discount it back to today's values. No, everything's being expressed in today's values. So Vivek, can I just ask you to talk to this scenario with this couple?
Yes. So as you see, this is working out the use of the money over a period of time. And they start off with $300,000 each, so that's the $600,000. But at around age 93 is when that money runs out. So that's above current life expectancy figures. That means they did have enough money to last. Now, it's not just their money, which is being taken into account here. The calculations are taking into account their eligibility for the age pension along this time period as well. So it's the net result of what they have plus the income support they could expect based on current rules that will take them. So as you can see, quite far from some of the estimates that you see in the popular press about needing $1 million or more, at a comfortable level of retirement as defined by ASFA of $63,000 a year, you can quite reasonably fund it with initial lump sum of $600,000, provided, of course, you set it to earn 5% at moderate risk or 2.5% above inflation. So it's a lot more doable than often people are given the impression. And this graph shows you the composition of the money that's coming in to meet the spending needs of $63,000. That $63,000 line is the red line at the top of the graph, and it's being met in the first year purely by the account-based pension because there's no Centrelink benefit coming up. And from memory, I think the first year after that, one of the partners is eligible, and in the second year both. And Centrelink keeps increasing until about age 73, when they've reached the maximum based on the assessment that Centrelink makes on your assets and income, and it continues at that level basically until the money runs out at 93.
Thank you, Vivek. And that leads us to, as we've just introduced there, the age pension and the eligibility. So there is an age criteria, there is a residency requirement, but there also is an assets test and an income test, and I'll talk through those. And we'll also show you the maximum pension payments that will be able to come if you fully qualify for the age pension. So age pension eligibility dates are increasing. So as you can see there, we're moving from a situation of being 65 to 67. So depending on when you're born, and increasingly as time moves on, more and more people will obviously be eligible at age 67, which is very relevant because it means if you wish to retire earlier, you could be in a situation where you have to fully self-fund from your superannuation before you reach these eligibility dates. If we speak about the two tests that apply, we'll speak about the assets test first, because for most people, they're impacted more from the assets test than they are by the income test. So, and I'll concentrate on the orange bars, which means this is where you will no longer be eligible for any age pension if you exceed these limits. So for a single person who's a homeowner, once their assets exceed 593,000, they won't be eligible for the age pension. And likewise, for a single non-homeowner, it's a more generous allowance. Nevertheless, if they exceed 809,500, they won't be eligible for any age pension. The question often comes, well, what assets are we talking about? For age pension purposes, once you reach the eligible ages, just think of all assets excluding the owner-occupied family home. So think of everything other than the home. So that includes vehicles, investment property, superannuation assets, everything excluding the home, just to keep it as simple as we can. For those in couple arrangements, and this is the typical scenario, a couple homeowner, you could have assets up to 891,500 outside of the family home, and that's at the point where you would lose eligibility to age pension. For a non-homeowner couple, it's a more generous allowance because they've got to have more capital to fund living arrangements. So as you can see there, their cut-off limit is 1.108 million. So this is where the government apply what I would call a reasonableness test, if you like. The argument being, if you've got assets in excess of those numbers I read out, you actually don't require the age pension. And similarly with the income test, they take the same approach. So for a single person, they can have and generate up to just short of 55,000 per annum before they're ineligible for age pension. And for a couple, once they exceed $84,167 per annum, they won't be eligible for age pension. And again, we come back to this reasonableness test, if you like, the government's applying. It's saying that if, for example, a couple are generating 85,000 through investment income that they're generating themselves each and every year, they actually don't need the age pension. In terms of how much will you receive if you qualify fully for age pension, and it's fair to say most people don't fully qualify. Most people qualify for a part age pension benefit. And in this case, as you can see, a single would receive 25,155 per annum. A couple combined would receive just short of 38,000. But if that couple were living apart due to ill health, which unfortunately is happening increasingly with aged care and the like, they would receive $25,155 each. So they actually receive the single rate. In terms of the Commonwealth Seniors Health Card, there is eligibility criteria. So it assumes you've reached the age pension age and you are under these income levels. As I say, there you can see the single level and the couple level at essentially 92,500. So there is an income test requirement, and we're assuming people are residents to get it. And this entitles you to cheaper medicine and bulk bill doctor visits. When I'm explaining the Seniors Health Card, I always say to people, think of what the Commonwealth is responsible for, and it will help explain where the benefits are. So, for example, Commonwealth are responsible for bulk billing and Centrelink and medicines and medicine prices. Therefore, it falls into the purview of the Commonwealth government. Whereas state governments are largely in charge of utilities and public transport, and hence that's why there's often a complementary state or territory government card that provides other benefits. So it can seem confusing that there are two cards, but it's a jurisdictional thing essentially. So that's why, and the state ones differ slightly depending on where you are. So it's important to understand that you are likely to be entitled to both. If we talk about estate planning, this is one of the areas where planning is particularly important, and I'll ask Advic to speak to this one because it's very often overlooked.
Okay, thanks, Wayne. So most people know about what wills and power of attorneys and beneficiaries are, but one of the things that's specific to the situation with super is that super can actually bypass your estate and go directly to the person you nominate as the beneficiary. So that's something to keep in mind as to ways in which you can allocate your money. It can go to your estate, of course. You can nominate your estate, but you could also bypass the estate. So all of these things are here to provide certainty that your wishes are met in case of when you pass away, and also in the case of power of attorney, when you're not in a position to make decisions and but you're still alive, of course. So it's really, really important that you think through the implications of what you would like to see happen to your estate and your assets, and set these up while you still can. Sometimes people don't realize that you cannot set up a will or a power of attorney once you have lost some or part of your mental faculties. Even beneficiary nominations of some kinds cannot be made after that point. So best to do it early. You can keep revising it as you need to, but very important in managing how your assets pass to your estate or to individuals. It can also have implications on tax that might be payable on some of your super money, depending on where it passes to.
Thank you, Advic. And that leads us to the uncomfortable subject for many of aged care. And why this is a particularly important subject is often you're not dealing with the person impacted. So you're often dealing with, for example, the children or the spouse of the person in need of care, which complicates things. But Advic, could you just speak a little bit about some of the challenges around aged care and the complexity, if you would?
Well, the first one is the one you mentioned, Wayne, is that even to start providing advice or start doing things with the government bodies involved, you need to have authority. So while in the previous slide we were talking about power of attorney and all that for yourselves, it's also as important for you to get them in place for your parents and other people in your family as well, because who's going to be empowered to make decisions for them? So that's a key part that can delay a lot of things. The other thing is that the tests used by Centrelink for aged care and for age pension are quite different. In particular, the home is partly counted as an asset for aged care purposes, whereas for age pension, it's not. So the interplay of your eligibility criteria can have an impact on how you structure your assets or what you might be able to get. So it's very, very important for aged care to, it's a complex process, but it is very important to look at all your options and how it interacts with the other people who might not be going into aged care and the rest of your family as well.
Thank you, Vivek. And this leads us on to how people such as Vivek and financial planners are able to assist, not just on those couple of topics, but more broadly. Vivek, can you just talk to some of the things you're able to assist people with?
Yeah, so the key, of course, is not just at retirement. Ideally, if you're thinking of your retirement a few years ahead, we can help you maximize your retirement nest egg by extracting every possible tax concession that you can and help you on that path. When you do reach retirement age, and especially when you reach age pension age, we can help you maximize Centrelink. There are strategies that can be used to maximize your entitlement for Centrelink. And that, of course, leads to how much money you have that will last you into retirement, because you build up your money, you start off with a certain amount at retirement, but you've also got to make it grow to last for that long term. So, and it's all got to be done in line with your preferences, obviously, and the goals that you have. And looking at it holistically, we also want to see that you've thought through what needs to happen after you've passed on, in that how does the money get distributed? Do we look at saving tax for your dependents or beneficiaries? All of those things. And it's not just about your super. When we talk about your retirement and setting you up for retirement, it's about everything that can be brought into it. You might have investments outside, you might have properties outside, and even though we don't advise directly on properties, we can look at the cash flow that it brings in, or the capital gains that might result if it was going to be sold. All of those things can feed into getting a holistic picture and helping you get from where you are now to where you want to be and continue on in retirement.
Thanks, Vivek. And just for general information, for those of you that are wanting to get further information, feel free to, as I say, there's the portal available, there's the phone app to provide you with information and forms and to get all your account information. We do encourage people to use projection tools. And I mean, we've got one, it's called Retirement Assessment Projection Tool. But I'm not being proprietary about it. There are many, many projection tools available on the internet. RetireSmart, which is the ASIC website, offer a lot of great calculators as well. Feel free to use them and to get a sense of how much you will need and how long you are likely to be retired for. I'm one of the RMs referred to at the bottom of that slide, so by all means, feel free to reach out to your local RM if you wish to seek a little bit more general information. We do have other levels of advice, and I'll ask Vivek to talk through what we call the limited advice and the more comprehensive advice.
Great. So as it happens, I have had a bit of a stint doing limited advice for a short period, moving away from my comprehensive role for a short time. So limited advice is an offering of the fund to its members to be able to access advice over the phone, usually, on a few topics specific to your money in the fund. So specifically, those topics are your potential ability to contribute to the fund, your investment options in the fund, your insurance as provided in the fund, and also transition to retirement. So the first three are provided at no additional cost because you're paying for it through the fees you already pay us. The transition to retirement does attract a separate fee. It's at $280, I believe. But these are all done through a very simplified process where we are restricted to looking at your options within the fund. And it can be very, very helpful for you to engage with this. There's no additional cost, and you can do it as often as it's necessary for you. The comprehensive advice is the part where we look at your affairs in much more details. It does require a bit of homework on your part as well. And so that provides us with a better understanding of where you are now and your goals. We look at understanding where you are now. We look at understanding your goals and priorities. And then we look at alternative ways of achieving those and eventually recommending the ones that we believe are in your best interest to meet your goals and objectives. So a more detailed process, we go into the weeds with that, with your help and significant discussions, but it comes up with a document that hopefully will set you up for at least the next couple of financial years. And we definitely think that it's worthwhile in some cases to be having a regular look at it as well. So comprehensive advice does involve fees, and how much fees you pay will be decided after your first meeting with us, which is at no cost. But at the end of that meeting, we would be able to indicate to you what your fees would be to proceed, because we know the extent of the work that we'll be doing for you.
Another thing I want to, and I know I've mentioned it, but I just want to emphasize the member portal. I can't encourage people strongly enough to register and access their information via the portal. It will provide you with all the information I think you would ever require around your balance, the nature of where your money's invested, the contributions that are going in. Do you have a beneficiary nominated, and where to get the required forms if you haven't. It's just an excellent source of detail on your account. And similarly, you can get this via the phone app as well. So while we do have a lot of people registered for the portal, we don't have so many registered for the phone app. So yeah, again, I encourage you all to download that phone app, and it will be, well, it's obviously very, very useful because you've got all this detail at the touch of the screen. In terms of the portal, what are the sort of things you can be doing? Well, as listed there, you can make a contribution. You can obviously see your balance. You can change investment options if you wish. You can see your insurance, and you can work out how much insurance you should actually have based on a calculator. You can nominate a beneficiary, a non-binding beneficiary that is, and many, many other things. If you wish to nominate a binding nomination, you do need to use the forms because we do require witnesses and signatures, etc. It's a bit more complicated. As I've mentioned before, please do reach out to us. We live in an age, thankfully, where getting help and getting information on your superannuation has never been easier. So please make use of the resources you do have available. They are online, as I say, and they are available in person over the phone whenever you wish. Our contact details are there in front of you, but a very quick Google search will find them as well. So I know there's been a couple of questions come in. So as I mentioned earlier, what we'll do is I'll get back to those posing questions, or Vivek will. But at this point, I would like to thank everybody for their attendance. I would like to thank Vivek for his input, because it's always terrific to have an advisor assist with some of the more technical stuff. And we do look forward to doing seminars in person. And I know this was scheduled to be a seminar where we would be face-to-face, but unfortunately circumstances have got the better of us. So we will plan to be back in schools and back in those RSL clubs and the like as soon as possible. But in the meantime, Have a terrific day, and we all look forward to speaking to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you all.